Welcome to Scream Scene, the horror movie podcast where we watch every horror movie ever made in chronological order, and then we rank them from best to worst. My name's Sarah.
And I'm Ben.
Thank you so much for listening to us today. How are you today, Ben?
I'm doing great. I'm a little stuffed up.
Oh.
So if I sound weird on the podcast, that's probably why. But otherwise, I'm doing really well. How are you?
Good. I just celebrated my birthday.
That's right. Happy birthday.
Thank you. So it's been a busy weekend. I was also just in Houston for work, and I'm quickly turning around laundry because now I'm heading to Mexico for a birthday trip with my mom and my uncle.
And it's sort of thematic that you're headed to Mexico. You're getting a little hint of Mexican flavor before you leave because our movie tonight is Mexican.
I mean, hopefully it's just the fact that it's Mexican and not like a horror movie type trip, like that the trip itself is not horrific.
Sure.
I don't face off death in any sort of way.
Yeah, I mean, we don't want your trip to be horrific, but I don't think you'd complain if your trip was gothic.
No.
Yeah.
You've kind of teased. What are we watching today?
Today, Sarah, we are watching MARCA DEL MUERTO from 1961, directed by Fernando Cortés. And that title translates as The Mark of Death. This is from 1961. And this is a Mexican horror movie with a kind of like a Son of Frankenstein sort of vibe to it. It's not actually Frankenstein.
Yeah.
So there's a mad scientist who was killing women back in the 19th century to harvest them to make himself immortal. And then he was sentenced to death, and the movie's main plot picks up with like his grandson in the modern day.
Okay.
Kind of picking up where his grandfather left off. So that's why it kind of gives me that Son of Frankenstein vibes.
When was the last time we had a Mexican horror movie that dealt with the mad scientist? Because we have had some.
Yeah, it's been a little bit. Because
so I wonder if that's what they were tapping into.
Maybe, like the Hammer Frankenstein stuff?
Like if we think back to Son of Frankenstein, it comes back after the like horror died in the US. So I wonder if, because of that gap and seeing a gap in their own Mexican horror movies, if they were like, oh, what if we did this? Because something that we kept talking about with the previous Mexican horror movies was this trend of adapting universal horror, their tropes, even down to their stories and iconic figures into a Mexican context.
Sure, yeah. I feel like there hasn't been so much of like a gap. Like maybe there's been a while since we've seen a mad scientist, but we have seen Mexican horror just continuing on.
Sure.
With those kind of gothic style films. We've seen a lot of like vampires and werewolves and things like that. I don't know a heck of a lot about how this movie came about, but I do know a little bit about one of the writers. The screenplay was written in part by Jose Maria Fernandez Unzain, who was a Argentinian playwright who was forced to leave that country after the 1955 revolution. So Unzain was, I guess, like seen as being a supporter of Perón, and specifically his wife Eva Perón. And the 1955 revolution was a military coup d'etat that got rid of the Peróns. And so Fernandez had to flee to Mexico. And coming to Mexico, he found a lot of work in the booming film industry of that period, starting in 1958, writing hundreds and hundreds of screenplays. And by 1976, he was president of a society in Mexico aimed at fighting for the rights of authors.
Okay.
And he retained that position until he passed away in 1997, age 78.
Okay.
The film's director is Fernando Cortés Rodriguez, who was born in Puerto Rico in 1909 and had initially pursued a career as an actor in Mexico and Argentina and a few other Spanish-speaking Latin American countries before transitioning to become a writer and a director. And he worked on over 80 films before he passed away in 1979 in Mexico City. However, for Mexican audiences of the time, perhaps the most notable aspect of this picture would be the starring role, which is both the mad scientist and his grandson, both played by Fernando Casanova. And he was probably one of the most popular stars of that period. And Casanova has the Guinness World Record for the most starring roles.
Oh, wow.
He appeared in nearly 200 films in his career and had the starring role in 178 of them.
Wow. Is Casanova a pen name? Or pen name's not the right word, but like a pseudonym?
Stage name, for sure. He was born Fernando Gutierrez Lopez in Guadalajara in 1925, and he initially aspired to be a bullfighter. He dropped out of school as a teenager, became a bullfighter, went to Mexico City, but after 5 years of bullfighting, he gave it up after he was gored in his right leg.
Wow.
He moved into acting beginning in 1947, and he quickly became unpopular with leading men with whom he was co-starring, because his height and his good looks were seen as like upstaging them. There's like a lot of famous anecdotes about like leading men being asked like to, if they could adjust camera angles so they wouldn't look shorter than Casanova, or like there was a famous idol, like romantic idol, who passed away, and Casanova went to his funeral, and like this movie producer told Casanova, like, I wish it was you who had died.
Holy shit.
He was kind of seen as like this young upstart coming in to this like established playing field, and really like exploding onto the scene sort of without paying his dues was kind of the feeling, just because he was so good looking. But like by the 1960s, Casanova was one of the biggest stars of Mexican action cinema. He appeared a lot in what are now sometimes called chili westerns, but just like Mexican westerns. His career declined in the 1970s, but he continued to make film appearances until 2007, passing away in 2012.
So where does this movie come in? Is he still like...
This is like
on the
height
rise?
of his career.
Oh, height.
This is peak of his career.
That's interesting that he's doing... Like, you don't typically see like, oh, it's at the height of my career, I will do a weird genre movie.
Yeah, no, for sure. I wonder if the dual role was part of the decision.
Yeah.
That's always like a catnip for actors, I feel like. Casanova's co-star in this movie, in the female lead role of Rosa, is Sonia Furió, who was born Maria Sonia Furió Flores in 1937 in Spain. And her family fled Spain for Mexico in 1940 due to the Spanish Civil War. Sonia studied acting in school and began her film career in 1954 at age 17. And in addition to her popularity as an actress through the 50s and 60s, she was also a very popular singer in the bolero genre. Later, in the 60s and 70s, her career transitioned to television. And the Mexican, like, media scene really consolidated into the 70s and 80s, like what used to be like tons of different companies and studios and television stations and networks consolidated into like one big media company by the 80s called Televisa. And in the 1980s, this like conservative government came into power, And they began really marginalizing people like Sonia, who was bisexual. And her and other homosexual artists, queer artists, sort of got like pushed out of roles because there was really just like one media company. And so the government could really put pressure on them to deny work to queer people. And it wasn't until the 1990s that she and many of her queer colleagues were able to return to their careers. And she passed away in 1996.
Okay. Interesting that this has a bit of a queer angle, because it's the first day of Pride Month that we're recording this.
Sure, yeah. There's a lot of like interesting little things, like you're going to Mexico. And then in July, Calgary Cinematheque is programming a month of Mexican horror films, which I was really excited about. They're all newer stuff past what we've actually covered on the podcast, but I'm very excited about it.
I thought you were showing one old one. I thought you were showing the Haunted Monastery.
No, I really wanted to show Phantom of the Convent, but it was really only going to happen if like we couldn't get the rights to some of the top picks. So I think the oldest film we're showing is from 1977. It's Alucarda.
You mean Phantom of the Convent wasn't a top pick?
Not for our guest programmer for this series.
Well, if it's a guest programmer, I will allow it.
So La Marca del Muerto was released in Mexico on October 12th, 1961. And in 1965, it was brought to the U.S. by producer Jerry Warren, who retitled it Creature of the Walking Dead and re-edited it significantly with a newly shot framing narrative featuring Bruno Vasoda as a police inspector getting a massage telling the story of the movie to his like masseur.
Anytime Jerry Warren comes up, it's a bit of a red flag.
Yeah.
That sucks.
100%. This version credits the non-existent person of Rock Madison as the star, a name that Jerry Warren made up to put on posters for these like re-edited movies that he would bring into the States. And all of the scenes of like the original cast speaking are overdubbed by Vasoda's narration explaining the story. And then like most of the dialogue scenes are like cut out. And you just have Vasoda talking, and then like anything that's not a dialogue scene will just play. It's pretty bad. It's like, it's pretty unwatchable overall.
That's not what we're watching tonight, is it?
No. So we're watching the original uncut Mexican version. It is up on YouTube. However, we're going to see, you know, what the last couple of years of technological advancements have brought us.
Oh no, we're doing
auto-subtitled, auto-translated Google Translate subtitles.
Okay.
Yeah. They seem to be pretty good based on the little bit that I watched here and there. But yes, that's the way we're going to be watching this movie.
Well, even if it turns out that we can't actually understand what they are saying, I bet it is yards ahead of whatever the fuck Jerry Warren put out.
I mean, the other thing that's probably going to work in our favor here is that the sound quality is not so bad that like the subtitles are going to have so much difficulty.
Sure.
I watched a couple scenes just to see if it was good. It seems pretty good for the auto-translate, auto-subtitles. So, you know, maybe AI is good for something.
But at what cost, Ben? All right. Well, folks, if you would like to watch along, you can find this copy on our YouTube playlist, which you can find at screamscenepodcast.com. You're going to hear a brief musical interlude, and when we come back, we will discuss La Marca del Muerto from 1961, directed by Fernando Cortés.
See you on the other side, everybody. Welcome back to Scream Scene, everybody. We just finished watching La Marca del Muerto from 1961, directed by Fernando Cortés. Sarah, what'd you think of the movie?
I really enjoyed this. I was very pleasantly surprised with the level of skill we saw on screen with its movie making. Everything looked really great. They definitely focused the stylishness in the stuff that's set in like 1890. But just because I'll say contemporary, it's technically set in 1962. So it's
the
like
near future.
The near future. It's less stylish, but that does not mean that it is less showing off its craft. So yeah, I really enjoyed this. What did you think?
I agree. Pleasantly surprised. Really enjoyed this. Yeah, let's talk about the story.
Okay, cool. I guess we'll just get right in. Okay, so as I said, we open in 1890-ish, and we see a Dr. Malthus. He goes and kidnaps a girl. She's chloroformed and then strapped on a gurney in his secret lab. Malthus takes this big needle and shoves it into her chest and her heart, and blood begins to flow from there through a tube that connects into this machine that then has another tube. It's basically a blood transfusion machine. We've seen this in past movies. I don't know if the actual blood transfusion machines look like this, but we've seen this type of machine in horror movies past. As Malthus is laying down to put the other end of that tube with a needle into his own heart, he's interrupted. Someone is knocking at the door. So he leaves his secret lab, heads to the door, and then is promptly arrested. It turns out that this is not the first woman. In fact, he has killed 6 other women in this way. We have the trial off screen, but we learn that he is sentenced to death by hanging. Since his arrest, he has aged very quickly, nearly like a decade a day. So he looks like this hideous old man, but he still has the strength of this young man. So he is hanged, but with his dying breath, he says that his descendants will help him rise again. Fast forward 70 years, and we are in 1962, and we see a woman named Rosa with her mom getting the old Malthus estate cleaned up and updated, getting it ready for her boyfriend, Gonzalo Malthus, for his return after earning his medical degree in Europe. The old estate is going to be his home and his office. Now, yes, his name is Gonzalo Malthus, the exact same name as the earlier man we were introduced to. So I'm going to be calling the modern day man Gonzalo and our 19th century Dr. Malthus. So Gonzalo arrives and he's very happy to see his girlfriend. They've been planning to basically get married the second he arrives back. And that night, he begins exploring his mansion. And he finds Malthus's old books, the secret lab, and the book of secret experiments.
This is the most Frankenstein sequel-like part of the movie. Like, yes, young Frankenstein, but really any of like Son of Frankenstein, Ghost of Frankenstein, those kinds of movies, this whole thing of like driven by, you know, voices at night to like find the secret passages down to the abandoned lab where like the big book of, you know,
secret experiments.
Right. Yeah. It's very much in line with those Universal Frankenstein movies.
100%. Something neat that's here is that girl from the beginning is still on the gurney as skeletal remains. So she was never found and laid to rest. So that's just a neat thing to have here. And I think that also speaks to the level of care for mood and atmosphere that this movie gives. So Gonzalo, as Ben kind of said, he becomes obsessed with these experiments and trying to determine if it's real, because they are all these experiments on establishing immortality. According to the notes, the ingredients, the equation for immortality is to use women who are 25 years or under, use their blood to basically be transfused into yourself, and that makes you immortal. And Malthus even explains in his notes that if he is killed by any means, he could still be revived through this method. Gonzalo has to see if this is true. So he begins to grow distant from Rosa over the next 3 weeks, and eventually Gonzalo gets Malthus's remains, goes and kidnaps Rosa's maid in a moment of like, I think he's supposed to be like, great, a lady who's under 25, come here, without really thinking things through. And he does the experiment and Malthus returns. He even goes to his regular age of being like 20 or 30. He's not still an old man. And he looks exactly like Gonzalo, except he has the mutton chops, which were the fashion of the time. Mm-hmm. And he has a scar around his neck from when he was hanged. And bonus, thanks to the modern invention of IV fluid, the maid survives, though she's very weak. So Malthus explains that, yes, I'm back, better than ever, I'm young, but this immortality only lasts for 2 weeks, basically. So I want to get to work on finding like a more permanent version of this equation. All of this secrecy around Gonzalo working with Malthus leads Rosa to basically be like, okay, clearly this relationship is over. So she calls off their engagement, basically, their relationship. It's been about a month since that relationship got cut off. And eventually Gonzalo is like, no, I'm not going to do this anymore. Like, I don't want to kidnap women with the risk of them possibly dying. We also have the maid kidnapped, basically. Like, she's imprisoned because if she ever got out, she would be able to say like, hey, these guys are being assholes. So I don't want any part of this, which drives Malthus very mad. He's basically like, fine, I'll do it myself. He fights with Gonzalo and locks him up, and Malthus goes out and kidnaps a girl himself. With Gonzalo locked up, Malthus still needs someone to go out and get the ingredients and everything, so he shaves off his sideburns, he wears a scarf to hide his scar, and he begins to impersonate Gonzalo. Just so happens that now Rosa's like, hey, I've thought about it. I actually still want you in my life. Maybe I can help you with whatever thing is going on. So I would really like us to still get together. Except she's explaining that to Malthus. During a dinner that they have to kind of celebrate that, like, no, we're going to get married. Engagement is back on. She discovers Malthus's neck scar, and the frustration and stress and honestly rage around like keeping Rosa distant from like discovering the scar. She discovers it. He basically begins to age faster than usual. So he runs off and heads back home as he's aging. The police have kind of heightened security, so he's not able to get some random person off the street. So he gets back to the house and he plans to use the maid again, even though it's going to kill her. And Gonzalo argues with him, so Malthus is basically like, fine, if you're not going to help, even though this would kill the maid, I'm going to go get Rosa and use her. He calls Rosa, asks her to come over, but by this point he's aged quite rapidly. So he tries to hide his appearance, but Rosa sees it. She screams and faints, and he takes her down into the lab to get her prepped for this experiment. Meanwhile, Gonzalo, with the maid and the other woman who's very weak, manage to escape from their cells. Gonzalo heads up to the lab and sees Rosa on the slab and goes and fights Malthus. So we get an action scene, a man hitting himself. As they fight, things in the lab are getting broken left, right, and center. Malthus ends up being pushed up against some equipment that explodes, so he goes unconscious. With enough time that Gonzalo is able to pick up Rosa and get the fuck out of there. Malthus wakes up in time to basically burn up in the fire in the house, yelling, but no, I'm immortal. I can't die. I'm immortal. And then it ends right there, like a classic Universal film.
Yep.
Yeah, so as I said in the beginning, like as we came back, great cinematography, just like amazing shot composition. The entire 1890 sequence is just beautiful shot after beautiful shot. They clearly put a ton of effort and competency and everything to make it super stylized. And while some of that stylishness goes away in 1962, they're still clearly putting in effort with like the way the shots are composed, with the way that we see a hallway past the door instead of just like the end of a studio room. I really appreciated how good it was. There were several shots where I was like, whoa, or wow. And it's been a while since we've had a movie that has had us react that way.
Yeah, for sure. The cinematography in this film is by José Ortiz Ramos. And yeah, it's superb. Like, this movie looks great. There are several really standout shots. One that really stands out in my mind is the wide angle of the gallows.
Yeah.
Is shot really incredibly. Just fantastic use of light and shadow throughout. The scenes where Malthus is like stalking women at night, both in the 1890 and 1962 sections, look great. They even do this like clever thing about like him going back to his old kind of hunting grounds and show you him stalking a woman in 1962 using the exact same shot compositions as back in 1890. Excellent compositions throughout. You have foreground, midground, background used in deep focus so that you get like a lot of great thematic resonance, like in the lab, and also like in 1962, you know, when Gonzalo goes to like get Malthus out of the crypt. There's all these great shots in the cemetery with like crosses in the foreground and, you know, things edge lit in the darkness so that you can see them. Yeah, really great looking movie. Thankfully, we are going to be seeing more from this cinematographer in the future.
Fantastic.
A few different movies, most notably the 1963 version of La Llorona.
Ooh, that'll be good.
Yeah. So I have to agree, like really fantastic cinematography really made the movie feel special.
And I think with the level of effort and time and money put into this, and with our lead actor, Fernando Casanova, being at the height of his career, I think this was considered an A picture.
Yeah, and there's like, you know, not just the cinematography, but like if we're talking about effort, like this is a movie where he's playing a double role. They, you know, for the most part, have only one of them on screen at a time, or like in the fight scene, like by that point Malthus has like degraded to like the old man makeup look so they can kind of have the stunt double there, no problem. But there are like a few different split screen shots with both of them,
and they look good.
Yeah, they look good. They don't look like awkward or poorly composited. They look really fantastic, so you can really tell that like care and attention went into this movie. While it's a little repetitive by the end, I also quite enjoyed the score, which is by Gustave César Carillon, which adds, I think, a lot of like nice intensity to the action throughout the movie, which was nice to have.
I disagree about the score. Like, I think it was good. Like, the original music is fine enough, but I found it way too repetitive, even like halfway through. I feel like it needed a few more variations, maybe something a little bit more subtle or toned down to help build the tension. But instead we just have like love theme and action theme. And it just, it became a bit too repetitive. So if I have any one critique about this movie, it's really that. Well, I have another critique, but really in terms of taking the movie on its own, it's the music.
Sure. I think in terms of story, there's nothing here we haven't seen before.
That's my other critique, yeah.
It's all done quite well here. I appreciated the detail that like advances in science meant that like the modern girls don't die. They're just very weak. And I appreciated that like Malthus is trying to find a way to do the procedure without killing people, but it's like he has to keep himself alive long enough to do that. And I think little details like that helped the characters feel a little bit more realistic, where it wasn't just like, I'm just doing these things because these are the things that you do in a movie like this, right? Like there was motivation here. You understood what the goals were. I also appreciated that the story kept things relatively simple, without a lot of like extraneous characters. Sometimes in these like B-movie type releases, like there's a lot of like, oh, and here's his assistant at the office, and like the dean of the college, and like the fiance's grandfather, and like their precocious young nephew, and like none of these people fucking matter. And I on the one hand, you know, yes, the plot is very simple, but I think the simplicity allows the movie to focus on like the look and the mood, as well as the makeup and the split screen and all those effects that we're talking about, and really focus on like doing those things well rather than like cramming in a whole bunch of characters.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to make changes for change's sake. So while I do have a critique about, you know, we've seen this kind of thing before, I completely agree with what you're saying of like, it's okay if we've seen it before, as long as like you are doing it super well, and they absolutely are. And
I think the movie does like a smart thing of, you know, knowing its source material and like knowing where the big scares should be. Like when she pulls away his scarf to see the hanging scar, it reminded me a lot of
Phantom of the Opera.
Yeah, exactly. And that classic moment of Christine pulling the Phantom's mask away.
Yeah, her reaction to seeing, like, this is Rosa, like seeing her reaction to when Malthus is like super, super old. I think she does a great job at being a scream queen.
Yes.
And not a lot of people die in this movie, really. Like, really on screen, only the first chick dies.
And then Malthus at the end.
And Malthus at the end, yeah. But because of that lampshading of, you know, modern advances of science and all that, like, I'm willing to forgive it for that, especially because we also see how weak the women are. Like, it's not like, oh, they're weak, so, you know, they just look a little tired. Like, they literally have struggled to stand up. Mm-hmm. So I think like they covered their bases. The makeup for the extremely aged man, they achieved that look. I think it needed to go a little further in order to have people's reactions of like the horror and old man to not seem a little strange.
I think they were walking a bit of a tightrope here, because I agree with what you're saying. Like her reaction, she screams and you're like, girl, he's just old. But the makeup is really well done.
It is.
It reminds me a little bit of that episode of Star Trek where they all go really old.
Yeah.
You know, but I think they were up against kind of two problems here. One is it's Casanova playing the role throughout, and he is a very like healthy looking guy, let's say, barrel chested, square jawed. And so even when you put a ton of like wrinkle makeup on him, he still looks very like hale and hearty. And I think one of the things that would make, you know, the aging look more horrific is if like he was super thin and gaunt and like his cheeks were really like shallow and like, you know, that kind of like more skeletal look or whatever. The problem is the movie goes out of its way to include this little weird plot detail that even though he looks really old, he still has a young man's strength. And that doesn't really make sense, but I appreciate that the movie went out of its way to mention it, simply because eventually they have to get to the scene where old man Malthus, who's like 150, is kidnapping women and carrying them, you know, bodily back to the lab. And if he was kind of like, you know, turning into like this, right? Like if he looked like Withers in Baldur's Gate 3, right? Like you wouldn't really buy that. So they're in this weird tightrope space where he's getting older, but he can't look less healthy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do recognize that for sure.
I think though, what you're talking about with like not a lot of people dying ties into my only real complaint about this movie, which is, I appreciate the way that it is referencing these older films, that it's this like new Frankenstein and it has these Phantom of the Opera vibes. And I really appreciate like the stylishness and the mood and the vibe and the look and the plot and all of that. But you are right. Not a lot of people die. So there aren't a lot of big scares here. Like our scares are the old man makeup and the like scar around his neck getting revealed. And there isn't a lot of like blood and gore here. There isn't really even a lot of like taboo stuff going on here. We're not really pushing any boundaries that we haven't pushed before.
Yes, but I will say we see him stab the needle into a body.
That's right.
But it's very quick. It has that impact, but that's also like the first 5 minutes.
Yeah. So I would say that like there just aren't a lot of moments where this movie's really delivering on scares.
Yeah.
It's mostly like atmosphere and an
Vibes.
old-fashioned plot. So it's well done. And I did really enjoy the subtle like Man Out of Time vibes where like Malthus,
he's terrified of vehicles.
Yeah, like he goes out the first night to like kidnap a girl and like a car drives by, and from then on he just has this like major car phobia, which like fair. And like I liked like him shaving the sideburns and cutting off his hair and like being talking to Gonzalo and being like, what are the new advancements and stuff. Like I liked those little details. I also of course really enjoyed the like mid-century fashions that are on display. We have Rosa walking around in some real Mad Men Joan style dresses, and Gonzalo has this like smoking jacket and ascot, and like it's all a lot of fun just for that reason.
I think Fernando Casanova does a fantastic job of balancing the different emotions of the different characters he's playing, because I would almost argue he's playing 3 roles, because you have Malthus as an old man as well.
Sure.
And the physicality he tries to bring to that. I
think he also does a good job of distinguishing Gonzalo when Gonzalo is like obsessed with the progress of science, and Malthus when Malthus is obsessed with the progress of science, because he has to do one as a hero and one as a villain. Yeah. And that's like a fine line to walk. So I think he does an admirable job there. Yeah. I don't have like a ton more to say about this movie, but it's good. Yeah, I think all of the actors do a very good job. And yeah, I think it's a movie that I would recommend as like a great example of seeing how someone in 1961 is adapting some of these like gothic-y classic Universal stuff. Yeah, for sure. You said the director's from Puerto Rico? Yes. So when he was born, by that time, Puerto Rico would have been an American occupied territory. Yeah. I was like, how do I put this without it sounding colonial? No, it's colonial. You can't. No, absolutely. It is. So I wonder if that means that he would have had the opportunity to grow up with the Universal films. I think by the time he was born in 1909, by the time the Universal films were coming out, I don't know his exact biography, but I think he was acting in Spanish films in Argentina and Mexico and other territories by then. Certainly by the 40s, he was in Mexico. Yeah. But of course, these movies come out in other countries. No, absolutely. But I think, also by 1961, the look of those classic films are ubiquitous. It isn't like, oh, you can tell that they saw this particular movie. Like, it's ubiquitous. Yeah. So let's move on to ranking. For sure. So where I started, Sarah, was I looked for like, what's our top Mexican movie currently? I did that too. Okay. So unless I'm incorrect, I think our top ranked Mexican film is El Vampiro at 73. Correct. So that's from the director Mendez from 1957. And so I was looking in and around there, a little bit above, a little bit below. Above that, we have Boricaibo Yashiki, La Monte del Vampiro, and then Brides of Dracula at 70, which is like a pretty disappointing movie all in all. compared to like Horror of Dracula that came before it.
Yeah.
Right above Brides of Dracula is The Flesh and the Fiends, which is the Peter Cushing, like Burke and Hare body snatching movie with Donald Pleasance in it. And I think that movie is a little better than this one at being transgressive, at being scary, even though it's telling a story that's been told before. And right above that, there's The Screaming Skull, which is a really cheap movie, but really managed to spook me. I really liked Screaming Skull. So I made kind of my ceiling Flesh and the Fiends. So the highest I would rank this is 70. Looking below El Vampiro, because I wasn't really sure if this was better than El Vampiro or not. And right below El Vampiro is its own sequel.
Yeah.
Below that, there's House of Wax, and then How to Make a Monster at 76, which is the sort of meta movie about like the guy who does makeup for essentially AIP's Teenage Werewolf and Teenage Frankenstein, like getting all upset and going on a murder spree.
Yeah.
Which is a lot of fun. But I think this movie has like a cooler horror mood and vibe and atmosphere versus like the meta-ness of How to Make a Monster. So I put that as my floor. So that was kind of the range I was looking at, 70 to 76.
Okay, well, we are right in around the same area. As I said, I also looked at our highest ranking Mexican movie, but that's from 1957. So I was also really curious, where's our most recent Mexican horror? So those were both in 1959. At number 91, we have El Hombre y el Monstruo.
The Man and the Monster.
Yeah, so that's from the director Oro. A little bit below that is number 94, which is Mysterious de Ultratumba, from 1959, from the same director of El Vampiro, Mendez. Mm-hmm. In each of these cases, it's very explicitly taking stuff from Universal. And I think that La Marca improves upon that trend because they just nail it so well. It feels more than just like, oh, we just want to try to like play with these tools. Like it feels like it's building a house instead of just playing with the tools.
Sure, yeah.
So for me, my floor was 73, El Vampiro.
Okay.
Looking above, I had a hard time because some of these movies are really pushing the envelope where La Marca tends to be, you know, playing it safe, as it were. Mm-hmm. But La Marca really nails that look and that atmosphere and that mood where some of these others might have faltered. Mm-hmm. But I decided that the highest that I was willing to put this, and this is even a stretch, is number 65, The Uninvited. So putting it right below that because I feel like The Uninvited had such a like fantastic gothic mood that I think La Marca also nailed. But all of the movies below The Uninvited, we have White Reindeer, Eyes Without a Face. I would count Screaming Skull here. Those are so unique and haven't really seen anything like it that's why I consider it a stretch putting it above those.
I think if we're identifying the mood of La Marca del Muerto as like one of its strengths, I think then it can't go above Eyes Without a Face, which is a movie that is basically entirely based around mood and doesn't have a lot more going on, which is why that's ranked so relatively low, despite the fact that it's very highly regarded in a lot of circles.
Yeah. So after hearing from you and sharing where I was originally thinking, I think it actually makes most sense for La Marca to take the place of Brides of Dracula.
Sure.
Because Brides of Dracula, it's a little disappointing because of how good Horror of Dracula was, but it's still very good as a Van Helsing movie.
Yes.
And what they are doing is still very exciting, and it has a lot more life, which is funny to think about, but a lot more energy to it. But yeah, it falters where, yeah, I think it makes sense for La Marca to go to replace it at 70.
Okay, I like that. Okay. So entering the list at the new number 70 is La Marca del Muerto from 1961, directed by Fernando Cortés.
So if you would like to see this list, you can go to our website, screamscenepodcast.com. There you can find links to the other episodes that we have mentioned today, as well as our appeals box. If you would like to contest this or any other ranking, please drop us a line through our Ask box on Tumblr. You can reach out over email at screamscenepodcast@gmail.com or talk to us on Blue Sky.
Scream Scene updates every other Wednesday on SoundCloud, Spotify, and many other podcasting apps. If you want to make sure that you never miss an episode, even when your apps shift and change, subscribe to our RSS feed. If you'd like to support the show, one of the easiest ways you can do that is by telling a friend about the show. Word of mouth is the best way for podcasts to grow their audience. Drop us, an email or talk to us on social media. Let us know how much you enjoy the show. That always really brightens our day. If you'd like to help the show out financially, you can do that by heading to our Patreon at patreon.com/screamscenepodcast, where you can sign up to become a patron of the night for as little as $1 a month. Those $1 a month patrons get thanked on the show. At $5 a month, people get access to bonus audio. At $10 a month, there's like bonus writing. And some of our more recent features on Patreon, we've been experimenting with like having them be available for the correct tier, but then also letting people come in and just like scoop in and buy it for $5 if you don't want to subscribe regularly to the whole Patreon. So there's a lot of options there to get access to a lot of really cool content, whether it be like movie reviews for more recent films, music, audiobooks, bonus episodes, all kinds of cool stuff waiting for you there at patreon.com/screamscenepodcast.
So what are we watching next week, Ben?
Next week, Sarah, we are back with William Castle for his infamous film, Mr. Sardonicus.
Ooh, yes.
Which I am really looking forward to.
Yeah, this is a movie I've heard a lot about that I am very intrigued by, so I'm excited.
So we hope you will join us next week, Creatures of the Night.
Bye.
Bye.